Well, welcome back to the Men's Divorce and Cordell Virtual Town Hall. I'm Scott Trout. As always, I'm going to be your moderator for today. I'm the CEO and managing partner of Cordell Cordell. And today we're going to be talking about a topic that is often, I think, overlooked in family law, and that's dealing with experts. Those are individuals that can help you along the way that I think a lot of attorneys who practice exclusively in family law tend to avoid or overlook. The potential that they can bring to your case. And there are all kinds of experts. We're only going to talk particularly today about 3 or 4 of them, and really just giving you some general terms. And always keep in mind that we can't give you legal advice during this virtual town hall. That is best reserved for a consultation. You can do that by going to our website at cordellcordell.com. You can give us a call at 866-DADS-LAW. We can do it just like this using Zoom or Teams, virtual technology on the phone, or you can schedule something in person. But you can find out more information by giving us a call, or you can go online and check us out at cordellcordell.com. If you're interested and you live in the Kansas City, Indianapolis, or Atlanta area, we'll be having some in-person seminars covering the 10 stupidest mistakes guys make when facing divorce. One of our more popular seminars will be holding that in person. You can go to the website, cordellcordell.com, if you live in those areas, and you can register. In order to attend, you do have to register. It is free, and it's a good time to hear a panel of attorneys in person talk about those 10 stupidest mistakes. We've done that before. It's been a number of years. We've done it virtually. You should check it out if you live in those areas. If you have questions, that'll be reserved for the later half of our virtual town hall, and you can submit those in the Q&A section of this right now. You can submit just your first name, your question, and we'll get to your questions in the later half of our virtual town hall today. So before we get to the subject matter, let's introduce our panel that we have today. Melissa over in Minnesota, welcome.
Thank you, Scott. As you mentioned, I am from Edina, Minnesota. I have been a practicing attorney for just about 10 years, 6 of which have been with Cordell Cordell.
Thanks, Melissa. Going to Christopher in Arizona, welcome.
Thank you, Scott. Good morning. Christopher Kennedy here from Peoria, Arizona. I've been with Cordell for a little over 5 years now. Happy to be here. Thank you.
All right. Rounding out our panel for today down in Texas. Welcome, Lauren.
Hi. Good afternoon now, Scott and everybody else. My name is Lauren Gilbert. I'm a litigation attorney here in the Dallas, Texas area. I've been with Cordell for about 3 years now.
All right. Well, great. So we're going to get right to the discussion on the use of experts, whether you should consider an expert. Again, you want to consult with an attorney who practices exclusively in family law, who is licensed in your state. Obviously, we each have our own licensure limitations. That's why we can't give you advice here during this virtual town hall. But we do want to try to answer some of your general questions. You could submit those in the Q&A section. We just have a few that we'll cover, but if you have a question as you go along, please submit it. Q&A section, first name, give us your city or state. That way we can try to address it if we can, particularly with our panel there. So before we get to it, let's go ahead and just take a quick break for this real fast commercial.
Family moments matter, even when they don't go as you planned. Cordell Cordell is a champion for fathers' rights. Kids count on fathers. Fathers can count on us.
All right, welcome back. Don't forget to submit your questions. So let's go to you, Melissa. We were talking off camera a little bit in one of the cases I have. It's often I recommend the use of an expert on multiple issues. And when people think about that, and this may be their first go around with divorce, hopefully it's not a repeat customer. There's a number of different ones you can think about, whether it's vocational experts, psychologists, real estate. It could be financial experts, counselors. You could bring in teachers, school experts about particular schools. But let's talk directly about financial experts, Melissa, because that's something I'm a big fan of, especially if you're have issues with maintenance, spousal support, anything with that, or businesses. So financial experts, when would you typically use them? Why would you use them? And why would the court be interested?
Financial experts, Scott, are very, very helpful. They're typically used in situations where you need to educate the court, which can be something that we have to do from time to time. Illustrate your client's financial arguments. So having something that's tangible and putting it in front of the court, or to add credibility to your client's position or their testimony. And those all kind of blend together. Ultimately, you're trying to boost the testimony that you have with something tangible that the court can see, or even in a mediation situation, you're adding credibility to the position that you're taking on any particular financial topic in order to try to get the other side to move to where you want them to be and try to be able to settle the case.
I have clients all the time that say, well, look, can't I just tell the court what I think my business is worth? I mean, they know most, right? They know best. They're the ones that have been intimately involved with building it, maintaining it, and growing it. So why can't they just say, look, Judge, this is only worth $1,000. This is all I have in inventory. Why can't they do that?
You bring up a very good point, something we see often. Business valuations are actually one of those tools that we can use to help our clients when they're in that situation, when they're that business owner, to say, here's on paper what it really does look like, not just take our client's word for it. Or they can also be particularly helpful where a party is a business owner and they want to downplay that value of the business and they're the opposing party. So a business valuation expert is something that we use, and somebody who can be helpful regardless of whether a spouse has been involved with the business or not. Mm-hmm. And those people can be neutral experts. They can be somebody that both sides agree on and decide to use, or each side can get their own.
Yeah, particularly businesses. I think it's a little bit dangerous. I've seen lawyers go into court with no business expert, no or valuation expert, and just assume the court's going to find low to no value. And I've got a case right now in the service industry where it's a separate piece of property. The business was organized, created for many, many years prior to the marriage. And so we have a period of time where the business has grown. And the question really becomes, is there a marital component? And if so, what's it worth? Our position is there is nothing. It's a goodwill. It's this person's business. And if they were to go away, so would the business. And again, it can't be a he said, she said. It is, I think you said, neutral. Someone whose job, our job is to give to the judge enough evidence from a neutral party to inform them to make a really good decision on that. And that's why I think business valuators, they can be scary. The cost, everyone thinks, oh my gosh, it's going to cost a lot of money. But it's one of those conversations. That's why we do these town halls is, conversations are almost free with your lawyer, and they're worth particularly their weight in that conversation. And so I have to think, in every case I have some sort of sole proprietorship or something different, you're going to want to at least consult with a business expert. You don't necessarily have to call them into court. You just want to consult with them, right?
Right. I think especially when you are looking at a situation where maybe a spouse hasn't been involved in a business, you brought up a good point about neutrals. Neutrals can be really helpful when people have the money to do that. The other thing that we often see is you have somebody that wants a financial expert as their own expert. And as expensive as it can be, sometimes it is necessary to have your own expert. I have a similar case like you do where a business valuation is a part of it. And we had our own expert pinpoint and explain very well the liberties that the other side was taking with the business valuation. We had two experts sitting in a mediation room and talking about the differences in the valuations. And so that allowed our client to make informed decisions about what the risks are at trial, what we can argue to the judge versus whether or not it makes sense to reach a settlement on those issues.
And the tax returns, the income statements, the balance sheets, they tell you a story, but it's only part of the story. And I know, like my clients, first thing he did was give me all of that information. We sent it on because we're required to. But what's happened is there's a dispute over an account. And those sheets, they don't tell the story. So we have to have someone else other than an interested party do it. And I imagine that's your take.
Tax returns are not the end all be all for businesses.
Yeah.
A lot of times what we need is P&Ls. We need to see what the profit and loss statements look like. We need to see what the balance sheets look like. But the best people to interpret those are those those business valuation experts. They know exactly what they're looking for. If there's not enough information there, they know exactly what to ask for. Attorneys are very well versed in those things, but this is what business evaluators do all the time. This is what CPAs do all the time. So if you're really looking at, can I get an accurate picture of what this business is worth, what income is being generated from it, sometimes a business evaluator is the best person to do that job.
Yeah. And then when you're dealing, as I am, is trying to understand, what does our client really make? What does our client really have at the end of the day? To a lot of judges, net income is very important, because when you fill out the income and expense, it's what do you have, what do you spend, and what's left over, what's available. And trying to, it's particularly in small companies, sole proprietorships, where sometimes there's a big blend. There's maybe a very difficult to identify what's business, what's personal. I'm using the company credit card for the gas, for lunch, whatever it may be, is using that expert to try and evaluate and tell the court, look, Mr. Johnson only has $1,200 left over. This is his net income. I've looked through these statements. I've dug through the financials. Pinpointing that is got to be so important, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And really, whether you're talking about a business or not, right? When we're talking spousal maintenance cases, like you mentioned before, net income is really what matters in those situations. At least in Minnesota, when we're looking at spousal maintenance cases, we're looking at what is the net income and what are the tax consequences of somebody's income. And then what is that bottom line? What does everybody have day to day to live on? And how does that compare to their budget and their needs? And especially a spouse who's looking for spousal maintenance. What is it that they actually need from the other party to live off of?
Yeah. And I think and I've always told clients, I don't like to do maintenance cases without a number of different experts, perhaps, at least to consider. And one could be, someone who's either valuing a business, or an accountant who's digging into even your financials, as you suggest. But more importantly, the one I really like, especially if you have either an underemployed or unemployed spouse, which is a vocational expert, someone who, I'll let you say who that is and what they do and how you use them. And I can talk a little bit how I use them in Missouri. You can talk about it in Minnesota.
Sure. So vocational experts are often used, like you said, in that spousal maintenance context, basically to give the court or a mediator or the other party, frankly, sometimes an idea of what that unemployed or underemployed spouse could do or should be doing for work. So it does typically involve some cooperation from the other party so that the evaluator can interview them. They typically look at their resume, their experience. They might do some testing of some kind, and then they use that information, they compare it against the labor statistics, and then they can provide an opinion about what that person's employability is. So it can be helpful for people who have been out of the workplace for any significant length of time, and then show whether or not they even need any retraining or what jobs they can jump off the gate and just get and be able to have some sort of income coming in.
Yeah. I've used this expert for 20 years. I find them invaluable. The one that always comes to mind was even on a modification, not necessarily divorce. My client was ordered to pay spousal support, and his ex-wife was a registered nurse. She had been out of the field for some time, still maintained her licenses and her continuing education and her life support skills. Yet she chose to stay unemployed. So we brought in a vocational for that very purpose, to show what jobs were available at what salary and the opportunities. And these weren't just potential. This vocational actually interviewed or called hospitals who had open positions, met her criteria, met her qualifications. That's what, albeit it sounds reasonable for me to go in and to clients to say, Judge, she's unemployed, and we know now there's all these nursing jobs out there. We just know it. We hear it every day. But the judge needs more than that, right? They need someone to tell them concretely, here's what I have, here's the salary, and here's why she meets those qualifications, right?
Yes, absolutely. And then tag team that with putting a document together that shows here's what income she actually has, have a cash flow analysis of using that income, what we think she can make, or he make, put it in the schedule and see, okay, where does that leave everybody at the bottom line? So you can kind of tag team those two and have both experts be able to show the court, here's the income we think that this person can make based on the vocational assessment. And then when we plug it in, here's what those numbers say. And no, judge, she doesn't need spousal maintenance, or yes, judge, he does need spousal maintenance, or whatever the case is.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of vocational. We're going to use it in the case that I have now. I just think it's your best evidence you've got. They just do real world stuff. It's not this theoretical, psychology is different. They have testing to back up and data, but the vocational to me is, yes, I spoke to so-and-so, I spoke to so-and-so, and yes, these are actual jobs, and here's the bonus that they're going to pay to sign on, and here's how much they'll make per hour, and here's the number of hours they're going to work, and here's the expected gross income. It's damaging testimony. And I think you can use it in divorce. I think you can use it in modifications. I've even used it in contempt actions where my client can't find a job. And I've had a vocational come in and say, look, his qualifications are here, and the only jobs are well below, and they won't hire him because of that. And, he was laid off during the recession in, early 2000s. And that's kind of where we used it. So vocational, if you haven't heard of it, I think it's something to have a conversation with your attorney about and to really explore. I think that they're really good, especially I think you suggested the report that they provide. It's concrete. The judge can read it, review it. It's really, really interesting. So thanks for doing that. Let's go to Christopher. Christopher, I mentioned it just now, kind of psychologist. That's something, especially with custody, what role can they really play in the family law case, whether it's divorce or modification? What is it that psychologists play? What is their role, and how do attorneys and clients use them?
Well, Scott, there's actually a range of roles that psychologists can participate or be involved in your case. It can be as simple as something from just a social worker that's going to do a preliminary investigation, all the way to, say, a comprehensive full assessment, including psychological evaluations, therapy plans. I mean, it just really depends on the custody, however, but there's a large range of what's available. And I think it can be very helpful. Psychologists can be involved in investigating claims where there's neglect or abuse, if there's claims of parental alienation, or one parent trying to restrict parenting time or access to a child. Psychologists can certainly help assess any potential risks to the children and can make recommendations as far as healing that family or moving forward.
Yeah. I think it's, you mentioned parental alienation. When we used to do these, town halls / seminars in person, which we're starting to roll that out again, I would always ask the room, because there was always a slide about parental alienation. And I'd say, how many of you have heard of PAS? It'd be one, maybe two hands in the room. It's worth having a conversation with a psychologist about PAS. I always described it as, you brought over a birthday gift for your child in the middle of divorce. Mom puts that birthday gift in the trash. Mom then goes to the child and says, Johnny, I wish your dad would come over and get you something for your birthday, but, he just doesn't love us anymore. But I will always be there for you, and I will take care of you. And why doesn't dad come see me? Even though dad has tried, well, he just has a new family, and it's time to move on. That's kind of a glaring example of potential parental alienation. And only psychologists can come in. You can give that evidence again, talk about what's been, said, or maybe what's happening but psychologists really are the ones that can kind of give damaging, powerful testimony. A good example, I just thought about this, was if anyone did in the panel, did anybody watch the Johnny Depp trial with Amber Heard at all? Oh my gosh, they had, multiple psychologists testify about, what's wrong with these two. Well, we all could probably say, they've got all kinds of narcissistic behavior. But again, I think some of that sways the judge and the jury. Remember, your judge is your jury, unless you're in Georgia or Texas, where you can have some jury trials. But I think it's so important to consider it. I've had, custody issues where I've asked the court to do a custodial evaluation where both attorneys and parties agree to a single psychologist who can make a recommendation as to how much custody they should be. But I guess the real big question is, guys are listening and thinking, okay, this sounds great. How do I vet somebody? How do I find someone? What should I be looking for? I mean, I can Google child psychologist and get hundreds, but what am I looking for if my attorney maybe perhaps has never used one before, doesn't know the direction I should go? What should they be looking for?
So, yeah, there's a lot of factors you're going to want to consider. Certainly, what type of psychologist you want to actually use, what kind of services you're looking for to start off. Then you're going to want to start with credentialing. Depending on what the issues are in your case, you may want someone that has a PhD as opposed to just a licensed counselor. You are going to want to look for someone that has experience working with families. Depending on the age of your children, psychologists or mental health providers have ranges that they typically work with. So you want to find, if you have teenagers, you don't want someone that's going to specialize in play therapy with puppets and stuffed animals. That's not appropriate for your case. So you want to dig into those accreditations, certifications, the specializations. You want to look at experience with your psychologist, not just how long they've been educated and practicing as a psychologist, but what experience do they have actually working with attorneys and with the courts and testifying if necessary? That's very important, because you could have the best psychologists in the world if they can't communicate what their findings are to the judge effectively, or they can't cooperate with you in trial and examination, then it won't be very useful. So you want to look for experience, you want to look for credentialing, you want to look at availability. Does this psychologist have the time to devote to you and your family and your issues? A lot of times, attorneys, we work with all kinds of psychologists. They're very busy. It could be the best psychologist in the world, but if they can't devote the time that's needed to present your case, again, that's not a good option.
I think, though, it's interesting if you're watching and you talk to your attorney and they've never used any of these experts, whether it be what we've talked about already. I do think it's worth having a conversation with an attorney who practices exclusively in family that has used one, because oftentimes they have good referrals based upon your issues. I may know of a psychologist who deals, with PAS. That's a very, technical subset of psychology. Some don't believe in it. Remember, it's not a diagnosable kind of, I think, the trait that they talk about, but there's some that only deal with therapy. That they may be a therapy times a very, difference between forensic psychology, or in treating someone, and, in terms of believing everything that comes out of that conversation. So I think it's worth having that conversation with an attorney who's used something and has a good referral source for you, because then they could talk about cost, because that's a big one, right? Christopher's cost. Mm-hmm. Is my insurance going to cover it? That's something they have to consider.
Absolutely. You do want to consider cost. We live in a world where you got to pay for things. So oftentimes, at least here in Arizona, if you have mental health services or psychologist services that are court ordered, insurance won't always pick that up. So you want to look at what availability those providers have for either sliding scale or how you're going to split the costs too. It's not always cut and dry with PAS, where you're like, well, mom's causing the problem, mom should pay for the therapist. It doesn't always work that way, at least not in the beginning. So cost is always a consideration.
We talk about experts early on in the case, and sometimes those experts will give the attorney guidance on property valuation. It could give the attorney guidance on what spousal support should be, what property, businesses are worth. And in this case, it could be, what should we expect on custody? So I guess the question for you is, how can you really utilize it? We want to make sure we don't discount that you can use them both in pretrial, settlement conferences, mediation, trials. You can kind of use it as a hammer or, a sword or a shield, right? It could be offensive or defensive, right?
Absolutely. It cuts both ways too. So the good thing about using a psychologist is we all have opinions about what's happening with our kids and maybe with our exes. However, the psychologist is going to, like you had mentioned before, they have tests they can do. They have practices of therapy, ways of asking questions, and they prepare a report most of the time, which is a great tool to use. It's an objective report. It typically comes with an assessment, a summary of what investigations, what documents that therapist has reviewed, and then it has recommendations. So those recommendations, certainly the courts weigh very heavily on what a mental health provider will recommend as far as custody goes. The judge ultimately makes the decision, but that report will inform the judge's decision. But even before you get to trial, it's sort of like a testing gauge on what the judge might order, or if you're way off base on something, adamant about your position, and the psychologist comes back with, nothing on parental alienation, you might want to rethink your position. Or, if you're looking to share custody, that report might bring to light something that would be a roadblock to that. So you can sort of put together your strategy for not just trial, but maybe at that point, cut your losses and try to settle it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting when you think about the use of experts defensively. I've done them, a psychologist, when ex-spouse was looking to relocate. And I brought in a psychologist to talk about, one, what the relationship was currently between child and my client. Two, how often they got to see each other and how the child felt through interaction with the psychologist, watched kind of a play date between my client and the child, and then talked about what is expected from, psychologically, the effect of a relocation 400 miles away going to do to this child with less frequent contact. Now, there are judges out there that talk about Zoom and how that's a replacement for in-person. I don't buy it, but defensively, you can use it as well, for that type of custody case, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. Just as important as the report saying what has happened in the past, they are equipped with the tools and the ability to assess what the risks might be for future custody, contact with the kids, and how that'll affect them emotionally.
Yep. So if you have questions, you can go ahead and submit those in the Q&A section. We're getting close to answering some of the questions that we already have as we begin to wrap up the virtual town hall on this topic of experts. But let's transition to you, Lauren, where we talk about real estate. It's a pretty appropriate topic to discuss, considering over the last year, a year and a half, 2 years, maybe we've been at the height of crazy, we were talking off camera, crazy real estate values. We have clients coming in who think they know what the real estate's worth, but the market may say otherwise. They may be shocked to know what their home, their property, their open lot is worth. So how are you using real estate experts in divorce, modifications, whatever it may be?
Sure. So the marital home or other real properties, those are often end up being one of the significant assets in a divorce. So it's really important that it is appropriately valued when we're otherwise dividing the marital estate of the parties. So, sometimes people just want to initially look at, all right, well, I can just Google any real estate website and look up a value. But, so like if you go on Zillow, Redfin, Realtor.com, they're normally not consistent with what they assess the value at, and it's not necessarily accurate. Sometimes it's a good baseline to see kind of a starting point of the actual value, but it's not necessarily an accurate value. They don't take into account like what the actual condition of your home is, the pros and cons of that particular neighborhood, things like that. So sometimes those values that you see on the website, they might be too high, too low, because it's just kind of a general guess, not an actual look at your actual property. Same deal with county tax appraisals. Those can also be over and undervalued depending on, I guess, not all states have property tax, but Texas does. So, especially the longer that you have these properties, people protest the values of their home. There's limitations on how much the county can increase tax assessments, things like that. So the actual value listed on your annual property tax statement also isn't necessarily a good guide either, depending again on the condition of your home and what the actual market is showing. So this is why we do want to bring in experts when there is a dispute about the value of the home, so that we can get an accurate value so that we can otherwise appropriately factor it into the division of the marital estate.
Zillow is a really interesting website. I mean, I look at Zillow. It does give you an approximate value, high or low. Sometimes it's way too high. Sometimes it's way too low. And I get clients all the time, well, Zillow said, and I know it's funny. I have a friend who's in the real estate business, and I jokingly, when we're looking at property or something, I say, well, Zillow says it's worth this. Drives are crazy, because Zillow most of the time is so far off, especially in a market like we just experienced, where I was mentioning to you all that she was telling me someone listed their home and it sold for like $150,000 more than the list price. And even that at the list price, Zillow is far lower. So while Zillow can be a guide, you're much better off with, and imagine I've used both real estate agents, brokers, and real estate appraisers to come in and testify. I don't know if you've done both of those, but I find value in both.
And so sometimes we're wanting to look at, all right, well, is the expected plan for the property, is it something that parties are looking to sell the property following the divorce? Is one party wanting to look at keeping the property as part of the divorce and maybe paying out the equity or balance out with some other assets? So that's one of the questions we want to look at. So with respect to real estate agents, sometimes you'll get there's a difference between a realtor and a real estate agent. Realtors, they have additional certifications, they have additional code of conduct, things like that. So that is a big difference that realtor friends want to make a distinction on that. But either one can provide what's called a comparative market appraisal. So they're going to be looking at recent sales in your neighborhood of comparable homes and giving you a general idea of what the actual market trends for that particular area are for your neighborhood. So one thing with real estate agents too, though, is, they might be a little bit incentivized if they're thinking that there's going to be a sale, but you can at least get a general idea of what the actual fair market value is for your home with that. Yeah. Same deal with an appraiser. So an appraiser holds different certifications. They are not a real estate agent. They are an appraiser. They're also a neutral third party. They are not interested in, what the actual price of your home is listed at. They are also looking at similar homes in your neighborhood and providing an analysis of what they think your home is worth based on, all right, well, your home is a little bit newer, or you've got these repairs that need to be made. And the appraiser, I think, is really important in cases where you have a property that does need significant repairs, especially like if you have flip houses or things like that that haven't been renovated. That's a big distinction. Where an appraiser might be more helpful rather than a real estate agent.
Yeah. I think appraisers, I just used one early in the year for two purposes. One, to just give us a general idea of what the home and open lots were worth, but two, to really attack the other side's appraisal and to kind of go through it and identify what weaknesses there were and what methods weren't used that should have been used, or write-ups in terms of add-ons to increase the value, to really kind of as that sword to show that the judge shouldn't really give any credibility to that appraisal. So again, with all these experts we've talked about today, I say again, sword, shield, and they kind of serve two purposes. And you may actually wind up getting multiple, one to kind of advance your case and the other one to defend your case. So I've done that before, where I've had experts, same topic, but for different purposes. But I find value in those as well. But I think you point out a really good distinction between the agent and the realtor. I know that's maybe a sensitive subject with some of the agents in that area, but I like appraisals. They're fairly inexpensive, $500, $700, it just depends. And it's a really good snapshot, especially now. I think we're going to recommend to our clients to go get another appraisal. It's been 6 months since the height of the market. I don't know what you're seeing down in Texas.
Yeah. So I recently had a case where one party was wanting to rely on like Zillow open door values, and that was significantly higher. My client had gotten an appraisal done that was significantly lower, and the court ended up ordering a real estate agent, appointing a real estate agent to say, hey, this is what I would list the price at, because my client didn't want to sell the home. He wanted to refinance. However, because our current market conditions with people generally offering significantly over, what list price is, things like that, the court wanted to take that into consideration when we were dealing with, all right, well, what's actual fair market value? So that was kind of a creative solution that the court made in that scenario.
So in Texas, what is a divorce lending specialist and how can you use them?
Often, sometimes when we're dealing with division of a marital estate, when we come down to the bottom line, we're looking at, all right, well, what are the parties' finances? What are the other debts that they're walking away with? What's their employment history? So, sometimes a party, if they're wanting to keep the house, well, how are we otherwise balancing out the rest of the marital estate? When I explain it to the clients, I'm like, all right, we've got this ledger. If husband is getting this in his column, how are we balancing that out in wife's column so that, we have a bottom line net result that is, if we're doing a 50-50 division, so that it's relatively equal. And so parties in a divorce context, one of the common solutions is to refinance the home and, use some of the equity to pay out to the other spouse that equity so that we can apply that to the division ledger essentially. And so people most often think about just doing like a typical cash out refi, things like that. But a divorce lending specialist is somebody who can analyze, all right, well, what are the other debts that you're getting? How can we structure your settlement so that possibly we could open up other avenues? So like typically with like a general cash out refi, the maximum amount of equity that somebody can pull out at is about 80% of your equity. But there are other options that you could do for divorce lending options that might open up additional percentages of that equity. And so they can look at how you're, like if you're getting child support or spousal maintenance, or if you're paying them and what your other obligations are, to see that you might be able to qualify for a loan through some of their suggested avenues, rather than, hey, I just called up the bank, I got a letter in the mail saying, you want to see your refi options. Oh, I don't qualify. Well, you might, but you might want to consult with some of these experts to see, all right, well, do I have these options? And then they can also take a look at how you're otherwise dividing up your marital estate to see, hey, should we tweak the language on this so it doesn't mess up your qualifications?
Yep. All right. Well, thanks. Let's get right to our questions that we have. That way we can leave enough time. If you have questions, submit them now as we're to that section of our virtual town hall. I'm going to turn this over to Melissa from Ezra. Ezra says, for a child formerly diagnosed with developmental disabilities, autism, ADHD, but when the other parent refuses to allow the recommended care for these conditions, and they have a 50-50 parenting and joint decision-making in Colorado, what type of expert witness would be best to support a motion to modify medical decision-making? Just a psychologist specializing in the conditions or something more specific?
First of all, it sounds like a tough situation to be in. So a very good question. Ultimately, I think if you're talking about, joint legal custody decisions and what do we do when we disagree, yes, a psychologist might be a good person. Ultimately, I think the first place I would turn to is the treating physicians for the child. What are they saying? What are the recommendations and what are those based on? And then I think I would extrapolate from there. see if there's anybody else that they recommend as giving a second opinion or who can kind of back up what they're saying. Are there medical records that help prove what the actual treating physicians are saying? So I think my starting point would actually be there. And then I think you can kind of extrapolate out and say, okay, are there other psychologists? If you really have to, depending on how long your order's been in place and how long you've had legal custody, if this is a new issue that's just popped up, or if it's been something that's been long-term, if you go down the route of, if we can't make this decision together, and this is how this is going to be with a child who really needs both parents to be on board, is this something where a custody evaluation down the road might be necessary? Obviously, that's hopefully way down the road, but you could be coming up with a conversation about, can we continue to make these decisions together? Or is there something more drastic that needs to happen? And what do you need to ask the court to do?
Yeah, I think the treating doctor, physician is probably some seriously powerful testimony. Not only why would you recommend this, doctor? Why do you recommend that both parents follow these suggestions? And what happens when one doesn't? What are the negative consequences to the child? And really paint a picture of that. We can all disagree on course of treatment, but I think what you have to then take the next step is, what happens when you don't? What are the likelihood of serious consequences to occur, with autism in this regard, whether it's medication, not taking it, something like that. I think that's your biggest advocate for you as a treater. And then you could even call an independent doctor to kind of to bolster with the treating, because treating physicians always have different approaches on recommending treatment for medical conditions. So you get an independent expert on autism and ADHD and talk about why they should do this and why it's important, and are there any negative effects? I think there's just a lot there. So I think that's a good answer. Thanks, Melissa. All right, Christopher comes from Jason. What should I do if I'm using a business valuation expert, but I don't necessarily agree with their findings?
That's a great question. My immediate answer would be to get your own business evaluation. That's going to be your best and strongest tool, and the person most qualified to be able to review that business expert's report and opinion and offer a contradicting opinion. That's what you're going to want to use in court or even in settlement. I think, like Melissa had explained in her speaking.
Yeah.
That, even in mediation or settlement, if you both have your experts, that can inform you so you can make intelligent decisions.
Yeah. I mean, I often use an expert to critique the report from someone else, and so that I can cross-examine them, not only in a deposition, but in trial. Again, it's always about trying to discredit whatever they've done and make sure the judge doesn't find anything of value to what they've talked about. So that's good.
Now, before you move on, can I jump in here?
Yeah,
so
please.
One of the things that might also be a good tool or a good starting point, especially when you're talking about costs, because sometimes people can't afford to have their own separate expert. One of the good starting points is go back to that expert and say, here's what I think is wrong with your analysis. Here's what I think is different, or I'm wondering why you came up with this when these are the other things that are going on. Sometimes that can at least give you a starting point of what's their response going to be. And then, do I need to go get my own expert? Because I really do think that this avenue is something that either the expert didn't explore, or they're blowing me off on, or they don't have enough understanding about. So sometimes even just going back to that expert with your questions or your concerns about their analysis can also help direct you in what else do I need, or how else can I show the court my side of things if I really disagree with what the expert is saying.
Yep. Good suggestion.
Yeah. We also have the opportunity sometimes too, if it makes sense, to instead of having somebody do their own expert full investigation report and be there in court to testify, because that can be an additional expense. You can have consulting experts that can take a look at what's been done so far and just critique from there. And so that can be somewhat of a cost saving measure. And then, if you decide, all right, hey, I'm going to need you more fully on later, you can make that judgment call later on in your case, depending on timing. But that can be an initial step as well.
Yep. It brings up actually the question for you, Lauren, which is, from Brendan, do you have tips for working with an expert that the opposing party is utilizing? How cooperative should I be? I mean, we've all talked a little bit about kind of reaching out to that expert to try to get some ideas, but how cooperative should they be?
Well, you can't force somebody necessarily to communicate with you. So, as part of, there's a process called discovery that's available in these family court litigation cases. So you can, if the opposing expert isn't necessarily voluntarily going to offer this information for you, you can depose them. You can say, hey, all right, I haven't been able to communicate with you, so I'm going to schedule a deposition. We can actually talk with you. And the nice aspect of a deposition is that they are on the record and there's going to be a transcript, and you can pinpoint and say, all right, well, you said this then. And then if it comes up later at trial, you can, and they're changing their story or changing their information, you can pinpoint that and poke holes there. But it's also a good tool as well for if you have your own expert consulting or testifying, for them to look at, all right, well, they made this analysis. Here's, some questions that you can ask and poke holes in. So that's why we like to have kind of our own experts if possible, because they know all the ins and outs of, all right, well, I noticed that they didn't use this particular test, or they ignored these particular numbers. And, that we're relying on their expertise to help us relay that information to the court and be the best story for our client.
And Ezra had a follow-up question just asking what a consulting expert is and how they're different. And you all can chime in if you want, but typically we may consult with someone who we don't intend to have them testify. We may say, look, take a look at this report, give us some ideas on how do we cross-examine them? Where do we poke holes? Or should we really take credibility in what they're finding? Is this really kind of accurate? We're going to consult with them. It's a little bit less affordable. They're going to charge us. They're only going to take a snapshot look, and they're going to just help educate us in that regard. So that's really kind of what I see as a consulting expert, unless anyone else has anything to add.
Nope, that sounds about accurate.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree, Scott. Sometimes here in Arizona, we refer to them as a rebuttal expert. And sometimes, like you said, they just take a snapshot. They don't prepare a whole separate report. They just kind of look at what the other person did and criticize that. But importantly, too, it allows the attorney, if we're not going to use them to testify, the question I asked our consulting expert or a rebuttal expert is, what questions should I be crossing on? What are things that I should ask this expert at trial?
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, that's all the questions we have for today and our conversation about experts. If you want more information, you can reach out to us at 866-DADS-LAW or on the website, CordellCordell.com. So thanks to the panel for joining, and for all of you for watching today. Tune in next month for the next virtual town hall that we hold monthly, and also subscribe to our podcast. You can go to our YouTube channel and find more information, more videos, more podcasts on a topic I know that will relate to you. But check it out on our YouTube channel. But stay tuned next month. Go ahead and join us for our next virtual town hall. And until then, have a great week.